I'd like to welcome my guest to the program, peace activist Mr. Ken O'Keefe out of London, and former U.S. intelligence officer Mr. Bob Ayers out of Somerset, UK. Thank you both for being with us. Well, let's start this off with Mr. Ayers out of Somerset. Do you think that the United States really want to stop ISIL?
I think that the United States wants to stop ISIL, but I don't think the United States is willing to take the steps necessary to actually defeat and get rid of ISIL.
What about that, Mr. Ken O'Keefe? Do you see this as a project that the United States really wants to stop this terrorist group or not?
Absolutely not, and I find it laughable that anybody would even consider the United States to be seriously interested in ending terrorism. We've had over 13 years of this farcical war on terror, all of it built on lies, from the false flag of 9/11 to the non-prosecution of Osama bin Laden because the FBI admitted that there was no evidence linking him to 9/11. From every policy since, the invasion occupation of Afghanistan, Iraq, the attack on Libya, destroying that country, attempting to fully destroy Syria, all of this is terrorism. Terrorism on a grand scale. Let's throw in Israel and its genocide against the Palestinians, use of white phosphorus, depleted uranium, and all sorts of other weapons of mass destruction against the civilian population in Gaza, which is comprised of over 900,000 children. And you find that the United States is without question the #1 terrorist of the 20th and 21st century. So how in the world can anyone seriously believe that the United States has any interest in ending terrorism? It is the ultimate terrorist, and its little boogeyman creations of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, ISIL, whatever the hell they call themselves tomorrow, is nothing more than the boogeyman necessary to justify this military-industrial complex which is running roughshod over the world.
Well, Mr. Ayers, what about that? It does seem that if the United States wanted to stop ISIL, why do you think that they've picked this time? Let's start from there, because we've definitely seen killing and raping, beheading and crucifying all along the way for years now. But suddenly, there seems to be particular interest in that they have to get involved right now to stop them. Why now?
I think there are several triggers that caused the United States to react in this current time frame. One trigger was the continuing success of ISIL in terms of expanding its territorial acquisition, and two, the extension of the, if you will, beheadings and things like that to include U.S. citizens. That always triggers the United States. So the U.S. is reacting to events that have caused them to have to sit up and take notice of what's going on with ISIL.
What about that, Ken O'Keefe? Does the killing of an American citizen always trigger this type of reaction from the United States?
Well, these beheadings have largely been debunked. At the very least, the people that are being executed in these videos are not alive. We know when you execute somebody by cutting off their head, when their heart is still beating, blood will pour forth very profusely. This is not the case with these videos, and it also is one massive manipulation to suggest that the life of 1 or 2 Americans somehow justifies yet another invasion and occupation in which we have destroyed 3 countries at the very minimum in terms of Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya. We have largely caused the breeding grounds for so-called terrorism all around the region. It is beggars belief that anyone would be manipulated into yet another policy in which invasion, bombing, and occupation, ultimately destruction of entire areas, is somehow going to make the world a better place. We have seen this all before, and the United States is repeating its same role as it has been, and it will make for more blood and more guts and more misery, and ultimately a breeding ground for those who see the West for what it is. Absolutely hypocritical. The West has no moral authority whatsoever. It is in no position at all to discuss any issue regarding morality because it is the most corrupt and most violent of all peoples on this planet. The West is the problem, not the rest of the world. And our little boogeymen that we create will stop once we stop having the power through the global reserve currency of the U.S. dollar to be able to pay these psychopaths to run around and behead and so on and so forth.
All right, well, stay with me, both our guests. I want to cross over to our Facebook page, and let's take a look at what some of our viewers have had to say about this subject.
The US needs an excuse to invade Syria. Why does the ISIS not threaten Israel and behead a few Zionists? Haha, this is funny. Americans want to get Iran to support the bombing of Syria so they can overthrow President Bashar Assad and work their way into Iran. The jobs and assignments given by the US and Israel to ISIL is almost completed in Iraq and Syria. So now the useful idiots are useless for the US and Israel. That's why the US has changed their strategy. There wouldn't be a problem if the US were not training and funding Syrian rebels in the first place. Withdraw all USA and CIA assets from Syria. No one believes you're shadowboxing with ISIS, Obama. It's amazing how obvious it is that the US government is openly supporting and arming ISIS to topple the Assad regime. Some of us don't forget Bush's Axis of Evil speech, and now Obama follows the same masters, so it's only obvious that the road to Iran runs through Syria. I am ashamed to be aware of this and still watch the Obama and Bushlickers' lack of awareness in similarity. How do they define moderate anyway? Gentle murderers? Respectable chemical weapon users? Kind beheaders? Do they rape wrapped in the Star-Spangled Banner?
All right, well, let's turn to Mr. Ayers. Some interesting comments there. What's your take, sir? Right now, the United States, along with its allies, Saudi Arabia and others in the region, are once again now trying to, as they say, prop up the anti-Syrian government insurgents, or whatever you want to call them, and fund them and train them once again and put more money into it. It seems like we've been down this road before, and of course now the excuse is doing this to counter ISIL. But many say, as you've heard some of our viewers talk about it, the actual goal is the government in Damascus.
Well, that's certainly the opinion of some people. The purpose of this debate this evening is to try to understand why the United States is acting the way they are and what the steps are that they plan on taking to try to defeat, degrade, or destroy ISIS. It's not a venue for standing on a soapbox and preaching against all of the perceived ills and crimes of the United States over the last 50 years. Now,
Sir, with all due respect, Syria obviously has a lot to do with this, because we're talking about the United States actually flying over Syria. So that brings Syria obviously into this scenario when President Obama says that he's not about to coordinate any of these flights or attacks over Syrian territory.
There's no question that Syria is involved in this current situation. The United States position is that they have been trying to work to unseat Assad. Now, the United States is in an interesting position in that to defeat ISIS or ISIL, they're going to have to defeat them not only in Iraq, where they're located, but also in Syria. If they defeat them in Syria, they are inadvertently supporting Assad, because Assad is fighting ISIL in Syria.
So then you're saying they don't want to defeat them there? Is this what you're saying then?
No, what I'm saying is they want to defeat them there, but they don't know how to do that without bolstering the Assad regime, which is something they don't want to do. So the United States is resorting to these consortia in which they're trying to find alternative ways and alternative sources to defeat ISIL without the United States directly doing it themselves.
And without the coordination, of course, with the government in Damascus. Mr. O'Keefe, what kind of precedent does this send? Because basically, U.S. President Barack Obama has basically sent a message to the Syrian government that if the Syrian government attacks any of their airplanes, that they will take out their anti-aircraft system, basically that they would be under attack. What does this mean when you're talking about a sovereign country, that another country has the right to go in and basically do whatever they want, whether they agree or disagree or not with the way that government does its business? What type of precedence does this set?
Well, it's not a precedent at all. We have already been bombing Pakistan, Yemen. We have been running around the world and basically in a lawless kind of way have been carrying out policies, including executions of anyone, anywhere, anytime, based on the so-called President of the United States having a meeting and declaring somebody to be a terrorist. This even includes American citizens. So there is no sovereignty of nations. There is no international law. And this so-called intelligence analyst, this intelligence analyst appears to be completely oblivious to the fact that it was the United States which supported the Mujahideen, which became Al-Qaeda, which morphed into Al-Nusra Front, then ISIS, ISIL, IS, whatever the hell you want to call it, has been arming these people, training these people, providing bases and training in Jordan and also in Turkey. Their little proxies of Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Kuwait have been funneling money and arms, and now we're being told that they're going to be training the so-called moderate factions of resistance in Syria in Saudi Arabia. That bastion of moderate behavior, the Wahhabi Saudi Arabia regime, one of the most offensive, if not the most offensive regimes on the planet, a place that we give weapons and we give cover to, political cover, media cover. The idea that an intelligence analyst could be so oblivious and so completely incompetent at his own field that he does not recognize the United States having supported, armed, trained, coddled, and protected all these terrorists for decades now is beyond belief. He can't be so stupid, surely, not to know that the United States has an inherent interest in popping up continuously one boogeyman after another to justify what I said earlier, the military-industrial complex, the goal of full-spectrum dominance, military bases all around the world. This is what's happening, and people with half a brain know this.
Go ahead, Mr. Ayers. You want to comment?
I'm not going to continue to be insulted by this other person. I'm ending the interview. Find somebody else who will listen to a moron speak his mind so loudly.
You insult the people of the world with your so-called intelligence analysis. You are sending American sons and daughters off to yet another war so that they can become so traumatized and so sick and so maimed that they can come back home to the tune of 22 American sailors and servicemen a day committing suicide. You are a traitor to your nation or criminally incompetent.